So man is asking help from above during the holidays, and he gets it in the form of an angel. But sometimes we get a little bit more than we bargained for. That's basically the story of Bishop's wife, remade as the preacher's wife. And I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Cheers, folks.
So this time around, we kind of talked a little bit offline about, this idea of the holiday spirit and stuff. And I feel like, different times, the thing we've seen over and over again in the holiday remake specifically is the idea of what is it about, like kind of, the holiday spirit, right? Or the Christmas spirit. I feel like that's probably like a good, question as to what is it that like kind of, that seems to be, because it seems to kind of change between the different films and stuff. But what would you say is like kind of at the heart of it all and stuff?
I mean, it's supposed to be the Christmas spirit, holiday spirit, however you want to call it.
Right.
It's supposed to be all about, family getting together and, actually casting off a lot of these sort of material pursuits that we have. And really, Christmas has become pretty much the antithesis of that. And then it's nearly almost solely about being materialistic and shopping. And I suppose you still get time off and spend time with the family. But yeah, it's very much a consumerist event now of the year, probably the event of the year. So
yeah, I think the consumerism is a huge part of it, and how like I feel I'm surprised that kind of there isn't more movies around like that idea and stuff like that, like in terms of just maybe like like just kind of like we talked a little bit about with Dawn of the Dead, and how like it really puts consumerism front and center. I feel like the other part of it is that we see a little bit in the, these movies that we'll be talking about today, that we become a little bit too consumed with some things that, really that we obsess about, that take over our lives. And it displaces what we should probably, focus more on. I feel like that's kind of like a central message that we really talked about with the Bishop's wife. Because here's like a guy, like just to start off with, in 1947 version. And again, we have David Niven from Pink Panther and Casino Royale and stuff like that as his bishop, who's like, he is so focused on getting his cathedral that he's willing to basically sell his soul. I mean, that's really what he, is willing to do, because of the fact that like, the rich lady like kind of is saying like, oh, you'll do it to these specs, and otherwise like, you're gonna have no cathedral and stuff like that. And I think that kind of really like that, that kind of conflict right there really drove home to the fact that like, is this character missing the point of why the cathedral exists, or is looking to be exists?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting difference with this movie compared to, say, other Christmassy sort of movies. Because when we take something like Scrooge, for example, or Scrooged, it's similar in that he's overworking, but it's really his lack of consideration for the society around him, which is the problem, and is actually what helps him sort of rise above and have his sort of story of redemption in it. And I mean, in this one, it's kind of interesting because it really does just focus you back on the family. It's very much he's sacrificing himself at the expense and cost of his relationship with his family, and his own sort of situation.
Yeah, I mean, he's like one thing that we've seen like kind of before, like you said with Scrooge, that like he's basically sacrificing his time with his wife, played by Loretta Young, and basically like and also his daughter, like kind of that's the other thing that like we'll actually see kind of running as a common thread between this and the remake and stuff. And it's also, I think that's something that is pretty common in as a holiday movie theme, this idea that like different times, like we're running around shopping, and like kind of different times, like just so focused on, again, getting what we think we want, that then, like, you know, we kind of miss the point of why, you know, we're getting the gifts and stuff. And, you know, like, that part of the whole point is that, like, to spend, you know, quality time with, you know, those you care about and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about It's a Wonderful Life as well, that's sort of, it's, that one's slightly different in that it's almost the value is just in your purpose in society, and you know, your own personal or selfish desires are sort of should or come second really over your family and your society. I guess it'd be the overriding message in that. You know, it's when you put it next to something like this or Scrooged, really, or I don't know what your thoughts are on that. If you think that's a fair kind of comparison.
Yeah, speaking of It's a Wonderful Life, another kind of funny, you know, like, this is the time way before, like, kind of, you know, the whole crossover universe thing that we do with movies and stuff. But, you know, we have, like, young George Bailey as the snowball captain in this movie. And then Mary Hatch's mother as the organ player, Mrs. Duffy and stuff. So it's like weird that they have these cameos at key points in this movie, stuff like that. We feel like it's our calling, so to speak, like, you know, in the case of this bishop and everything, that we feel like, okay, you know, the other people in our lives, they're just as much, you know, like, kind of, well, you know, like, kind of, they'll understand, like, kind of, that's why I'm sacrificing. It is for the greater good. It's something, a higher purpose than, you know, like, kind of this very temporal or earthly desire to, you know, take care of our loved ones and stuff like that. It's like, kind of, you know, like a higher calling, and like, we're using that as an excuse or why we're sacrificing the time with, you know, the people that are more like a earthly need and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it sort of plays into this idea of, you know, obsessive behavior as well, and that he's so obsessed with his sort of cathedral that he can't sort of see the wood for the tree, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, I would have thought though that this was a great idea for a pitch for a successful movie, because it's about a man whose wife is generally unsatisfied with him, and you know, and you'd have thought that's a market that would be quite easy to tap into. So you know, it was no surprise that this got remade, but yeah, it's
and of course walks in, you know, like, I mean, you know, kind of comparing David Niven to the angel Dudley, you know, played by Cary Grant. Like, it's kind of like, you know, it's almost laughable in a way of, like, you know, that there's almost like no competition. And so it's funny in a way that, like, in the end, you know, like, kind of, you know, major spoiler, that the wife is given this choice between, you know, like, this angel, right, and the husband, and she chooses the, you know, the husband, because, you know, like, it's all about love. And but it's like, kind of in reality, like, you know, what would likely happen and stuff. I mean, that's kind of, like, I think, an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny sort of relationship anyway, in that, you know, you just kind of get the feeling that why would this angel be so? He seems to be so overly romantic in this whole thing. I mean, he's helping David Niven's character, but, you know, we spend an awful lot of time with him sort of trying to woo the wife. Which is kind of strange, really.
I was going to say, it's a really bizarre kind of love triangle is really what you get down to.
Yeah. But then again, on the other side, it's hard to feel sorry for the bishop, because he lives in this nice big house in the middle of New York. He's
Seriously.
got like a housekeeper, and he's got room and board. He seems to be doing quite nicely. It's and then he's just obsessed with the cathedral. There's not any sort of great problems he's facing other than that he can't get his cathedral built. So yeah, you have a lot more sympathy for the wife, really, who just sort of wander off with this random angel. I would say though that, of all the performances I've seen with Cary Grant, this was perhaps one of the weaker ones for me, because I didn't really. He was so angelic and so sort of uncomplicated and simply sort of nice all over, that his character didn't really have much depth, and it was difficult to kind of like find something that was really I guess, human or something you could identify with in his character. I found myself paying more attention to David Niven when there was the scenes between him and Cary Grant than when it was just Cary Grant, sort of,
I guess maybe in a way that was intentional, that like we're, like because he is so perfect, right? As an angel, stuff like that, that therefore we, we put ourselves more into the human's shoe and stuff like that, like the bishop, because the bishop really, like, let's face it, he's not really that likable, like overall either, like you said, or relatable, because of like you said, he's got servants, he's like kind of willing to basically sacrifice like everything around him for this cathedral, stuff like that. It just kind of like makes you really wonder. Well, here's the thing. The biggest problem I have with this movie is what message is it really telling us? Because in the end, he got everything right, but he also forgot all that he had, basically done or that had happened before that, and Dudley's involvement in all that. So, did he really grow? Because to me, like part of the point of and something I've learned and stuff, like where the stories that really click with us are where the person has to somehow grow in the process of getting what they want. And I mean, if he forgets everything because like it's all dispelled, like kind of all, wiped away by the angel and stuff, like what really happened? Like kind of,
Yeah, you probably wouldn't learn the lesson, would you? Because of course you learn from your mistakes, and that's how you, as you said, you learn to appreciate these things. But you just get, obviously that wouldn't have happened. Everything just kind of worked out, and off he goes. Probably she'd be just as miserable next Christmas, I'm guessing.
It's almost like I feel like in some ways the like it's like an alternative time travel dilemma, because really all they did was just fast forward into a future where everything just kind of worked out and stuff, like so what really happened, and what's the point of the movie then?
Well, it's just to instill faith in people in Christmas, I suppose, but yeah, for me, what was kind of interesting is actually how they deal with Christianity in this and the remake. Mostly because you have the professor character who's quite interesting.
Oh, right.
In that you're kind of introduced to him, and he's there going, oh, well, you meet him quite early on, and he's there going, oh, well, I'm not particularly religious because I'm too intelligent for that.
Right.
But it reminds me of my youth, which is why I celebrate it, which is kind of almost like this signaling to the audience that, yeah, we know that you may not be as sort of ardent Christians and want to watch a movie about a bishop for 2 hours, but come along with the ride anyway, because it's Christmas time. It'll be fun. And it's sort of, the other thing that was kind of interesting was that and this is a very sort of subtle point, is that he'd been kicked out of the university or wherever he was because he was sort of too much of a classicist, and it was the rich people that basically kicked him out because he thought that the way of them interfering wasn't, in keeping with ever his sort of classical ideas about democracy, which kind of goes back to, I guess, maybe ancient Greek, Roman sort of things. It just made me think of that in terms of inequality, that you can only own 4 times. The richest man can only own 4 times what the poorest man has, and except for, of course, if you're the emperor or whoever it was. But that was kind of, they had a much more sort of stringent code on inequality back then. So you kind of felt there was some, touching very slightly on that with his character.
And also kind of connected with that, I think, is more than likely, with a university, a kind of I don't know about unwritten rule, but it's kind of like one of those kind of things that, like, if you don't publish, it's publish or perish, right, and stuff. And so he had really, after a certain point of like losing his faith and all that, he'd become dry, like, and so after like kind of Dudley came back and performed this kind of miracle of the wine, like kind of into water, or actually
everlasting sherry.
Everlasting sherry, right?
Yeah.
That then his faith is restored, right, and stuff, and it almost seemed like like his faith was kind of restored by this, the sherry in another way. And then he suddenly became, prolific again and stuff. So I think that's like an interesting kind of thing that like, somehow, between, your faith being restored by, kind of magical elixir, I guess, and stuff, is also the fact like, that your faith kind of leads to being more creative.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it almost sounds like an adult Willy Wonka invention or something, like the everlasting sherry.
Right.
But he makes this point of saying that it gives you all the inspiration and lucidity, but without the hangover or the actual drunkenness. I thought was quite interesting, and he's just then necking this stuff away. But it's why that would necessarily make you a really good academic writer, I don't know.
Right.
But it was an interesting sort of aside anyway.
Yeah, that's maybe like what unfortunately, like some writers like Ernest Hemingway probably could use of as a everlasting hangover
That's right.
type of beverage, I guess.
Yeah, we're almost back into Brave New World territory then. But
right.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I feel like overall, and this is the kind of like more just generally holiday movies in general, I feel like in a way that like they're almost kind of like a type of soma, because of like how the part of the message is this idea like, oh, don't be too ambitious, and I kind of just throttle back,
Just spend time with your family. Don't worry about that evil man that's stealing your house from you or destroying the community. It'll all be okay in the wash. Yeah. Yeah,
your mortgage will be saved. No, don't worry. Like,
Yeah. Everybody in your community will all come around and bail you out.
Yes.
Don't worry about it.
Yes.
I know. It's terrible, isn't it? Yeah. So, I mean, it's, I don't know. You're right, though. What is the actual message? I guess the message is sort of angels could be real. I guess that's one message, perhaps. Be careful what you wish for, I suppose, would be another one. Because I mean, I think it's this kind of thing of like there's also this kind of permissive sort of attitude towards sort of flirtation and adultery almost. It's kind of like, it's okay just to kind of flirt a bit with someone else, as long as you just forget about them afterwards and go back and be married. That was the kind of the message I got from it. But
through like the taxi driver, like Sylvester or something like that, who actually, another funny connection is that he was the general from a guy named Joe and stuff like that.
Right, yeah.
And but apparently, like, when we have this kind of magical flirtation and stuff, that then all around us, people will also kind of fall, really like kind of, they'll be not only sympathetic, but they'll actually like also love you too, and like kind of like just basically see like kind of the magic of your attraction and stuff. So they'll be kind of like seduced to kind of basically give you free cab rides. And
that's right. Yeah.
And no, don't worry about the fare, and then like, and that'll, kind of carry over a little bit, like to even like to when like the next day, like, when they discover, or he discovers that like, oh, wait a minute, that's not the husband. It's actually the bishop and stuff. Okay, well, I'll give you a ride also and stuff. So the goodwill kind of carries over, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's interesting sort of crossover. You kind of think what they're trying to say, almost like sort of romantic love and societal love, you might say, or the kind of good spirit sort of thing that you would promote in Christianity. Is they're almost interchangeable to some degree in this. I mean, I think as well what was interesting for me was the way that this is a bit like It's a Wonderful Life. The characters get to see their own lives through someone else's eyes, or their own life abstracted in some way. In It's a Wonderful Life, he gets to see his own life from himself, but removed as if he wasn't there, from almost a different, completely different perspective. In this one, the bishop gets to see his life through the angel's eyes and gets to see all the things that are missing. So again, it's this kind of idea of, being able to reevaluate your own life from an abstracted perspective.
Right.
So he gets to appreciate, you know, what the angel sees in his wife or what the angel sees in his circumstance. So that was an interesting take on it for me, or how they sort of abstract the way, you know, what is it about these movies where you're taking yourself out of your own situation for 2 hours to make you reevaluate your life? Or why is this something that people want to pursue? Because A Guy Named Joe was a little bit like that as well, really. Similar sort of thing, really, actually, because you've again got, you know, the young pilot being able to see his life through the eyes of the older dead pilot, basically, and all the things he could have done differently.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that, you know, even though like A Guy Named Joe isn't a holiday movie, but the common denominator is having an angel, you know, like this kind of spiritual being who is this third person that helps us to kind of have a different lens to, you know, like kind of something that we're missing, you know, like I think that's something that like is an interesting point that as earthly beings, you know, different times our point of view is limited. And so like, you know, a spiritual being is kind of person who like can bounce around magically anywhere and show up anywhere and stuff like that, can give us a perspective that, you know, we're missing. I think that's actually, you know, is maybe in some ways the trope of an angel that like is you know, effective. It definitely, you know, like it's something that we couldn't really do right with, you know, just injecting another character, another, you know, like sometimes we do have like other, you know, supporting characters who do kind of like help us to see something that we were missing and stuff. Like, you know, going back to like, you know, last week's discussion or with, you know, Shall We Dance and stuff like that is like where Sugiyama and Mai, they both helped each other to kind of see something that like, you know, they were missing and stuff like that, but it's still not the same as an angel where, you know, like kind of that there's this kind of almost magical knowledge that they have then that it's a way that kind of helps both the character and then the audience kind of, you know, like see something that like it's not possible, I guess, through just, you know, another character and stuff.
Yeah, no, and I think actually the more you think about how this is used, you're right, and they are there basically to sort of get the audience to reevaluate things. You know, they're not materialistic. You can see everything from a non-materialistic plane. There's no kind of romantic attachment, and there's even no sort of basis of time as well, because they take great pains in this and the remake to sort of say, okay, well, I was here a while ago, and you know, I've been in heaven for, you know, donkey's years, waiting for my chance to come back, and things like this. So, and I sometimes feel like, you know, the ghosts in Scrooge also represent these alternate perspectives outside of mortal reality to reevaluate your life. They're very much more, you know, time based in Scrooge rather than. But they will have a very sort of, you know, similar sort of way of getting him to reevaluate his materialism. But you know, that is often the function they play, and I think as well that's the other way this is used in movies is often with much older characters, because it's almost like they've lived their whole life and they can now sort of evaluate everything from start to finish and know what's really important. Like in a way, sort of characters like sort of Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid is almost like a similar sort of character, someone who can take this guy out of his personal everyday problems and put them in a much larger perspective. So, yeah.
And despite the fact that like, they've been around stuff, that's the thing we do see. You know, we saw this in It's a Wonderful Life. We saw this time around. And then even like, you know, going into the remake, we'll talk a little bit more about that, about like that there's almost like a childlike quality, you know, like Clarence, you know, like kind of has this thing like kind of where, you know, even though he's been around and then like he's even forgotten what it's like to drink and stuff like that. He orders like a, you know, Shirley Temple, right, and stuff. And then like, you know, that was part of the joke in that one where like, you know, the bartender kind of like, you know, goes, okay, we just serve stiff drinks here, buddy. Like, you know, and, you know, here in this one, you know, he kind of like has this kind of childlike quality that like, you know, really kind of resonates with like the daughter too, that like, you know, he's telling the story and stuff like that, and in such a way that like there's this kind of innocence that seems to kind of go with it. That I mean, I think that's kind of what's interesting. Even though has this kind of longer history or this kind of wealth of wisdom and stuff like that, but still this kind of childlike quality, and I feel like in some ways that epitomizes or kind of like tries to create this idea that like like even though like with the professor or stuff like that, he has all this kind of knowledge and everything, but he in some ways kind of like shows like kind of how knowledge and accumulating stuff in our head can actually get in our way and stuff like that. And then it was only after meeting Dudley that then he kind of unlocks that and stuff, and he's kind of remembers back to when he was a kid and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's the childlike sort of innocence and this idea that you just need to experience things at a very sort of visceral face value way to really sort of get the most out of the experience is something that you get from him. Although I'd say they do that much more effectively in the remake. But and I think that's one of the things that's a bit more subtle, but definitely an interesting thing about him as an angel character. I mean, the other thing is, I would say, what is it that actually transforms people by being around Dudley, in your opinion, from the bishop's wife? Because for me, it seemed like it was, and this is a sort of an underlying message or theme of the movie, is that it's this sort of personal empathy that's really important, because it's his sort of him establishing the relationship and the connection with the wife, and also with some of the like Lady Hamilton, who's funding the church. It was his ability to sort of tap into her own sort of childlike influences that sort of helped him sort of secure the funding for the church. So that was what I got out of it, was this sort of this tale of a bit like actually our Japanese sort of horror movies we watched not long ago, in that you've got to sort of empathize with people to bring out the best in them.
No, that's a great point. And I think like that was really just epitomized, like kind of with Mrs. Hamilton, like you said, that like that here was this kind of woman who had forgotten like kind of this love and stuff like that, and it was just the fact that like here is this person willing to kind of listen to her story, like, oh, actually it starts off like kind of that he's playing this song that like he magically knows, and like, but it's enough to have her suspend her like kind of like that she's emotionally kind of captivated by that then she lets down her guard, and then at that point like he basically just extends this kind of empathy and like listens to her and stuff like that. And I think what's interesting about like we see this in the Bishop's Wife that we don't see in Preacher's Wife is that I don't know if you noticed, but like the way they constantly do this is that like, which is a rare cinematographic technique, but they would always have Dudley's back, like like, so like, it's interesting that like in some ways they almost downplay like here's Cary Grant, right, somebody who's known for his looks and stuff like that, and they intentionally, like different times, are always showing the other characters' reaction to him and stuff, and that really puts us more into the shoes than of like kind of the quote unquote human and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that was a very interesting observation actually, because unconsciously there was part of me that thought, like, why am I not sort of paying more attention to Cary Grant through this movie? And you're right, there are a lot of shots where you're just seeing him from the side, you're seeing him from the back, and actually it's the other. You're right, the other people are the ones that are in frame and you're focusing on.
It reminds me of the key scenes in Ben-Hur, actually, when we don't really see Christ's face, we just see like kind of people's reaction to kind of this all kind of inspiring being stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think it is quite interesting the way they play that character, because he's very, I mean, it's a very downplayed character really in many ways. He doesn't have anywhere near as much charisma as the angel in The Preacher's Wife, we'll say. But it was an interesting choice to have Cary Grant in that role.
Right.
But
Yeah, apparently, like, he actually wasn't the first choice, and
Mm.
initially, like, David Niven was up, for like kind of like that was originally, one of the ideas was casting David Niven, and I think it just, yeah, it definitely would not have worked. I mean, it just, I
Mm.
think, kind of that was definitely who they needed in that role and stuff like that, at least for kind of the way like the story went and stuff.
Yeah. I think as well, what's interesting for me about The Bishop's Wife is this idea that, okay, you've got, so the angel coming down, helping you out, providing the main character with this extra perspective. But there is this thing of like, this angel is like tempted into romantic
Right.
love. He's being pulled back from his astral plane into these sort of earthly things, and has a real sort of challenge trying to
Mm.
not sort of pursue that during the course of the movie, which is a very kind of interesting message. But yeah, I'm still kind of wrangling with that a little bit myself, as to what were they really trying to say with
I
that, and
know.
what is the actual message of that.
I think it's I don't think they were sure themselves, and I feel like
mm,
that's kind of one of the key flaws of this version and stuff. But it does open up a interesting can of worms, because like imagine like that that didn't happen, right, and stuff, and then like that then like kind of almost like an alternate universe, like that, like where he does get his way, and then, like Dudley, like kind of, I don't know, like seduces um the wife and stuff like that, and like now Julia's kind of with this angel, and like how does that work, and it's an interesting can of worms, I guess.
would there be an immaculate conception as well
Right.
as a result? I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? To what they're I guess it's this sort of thing of, you can't really tempt an angel,
Mm.
but I guess someone who's really, really, the wife of a bishop is so good that she could potentially tempt an angel or something like this. Like, this is the only way you could possibly tempt an angel, is if,
Right.
you're a devout bishop's wife, if you're that close to leading a pure and holy life.
And actually, that's what's featured, which I, strangely enough, and I'm kind of wondering why that was and stuff. And I wonder if like part of this was like the post-war kind of thing and stuff like that. That like during like wartime, maybe like a lesser wife was tempted and stuff like that, and then like now like let's get back to the virtues of like kind of a strong steady woman and stuff, and like kind of where that's what we need more of, and so like
I'm,
that's the virtue we're going to really shine the light on here.
I think you're absolutely right. I think this has to be a product of post-war attitudes to marriage and women's roles, because it's, that's what we saw in a guy named Joe, was this idea that you shouldn't just go and sleep with the first pilot that
Right.
you come across. And I mean, this might be this kind of thing. These guys have already sacrificed so much. They're not bishops, but they've obviously put themselves, they put other people before themselves in a good cause. And so, you should stick with that guy and not get tempted by the young, handsome angel, I guess, is
Right.
I think you're definitely onto something there. There was quite a few movies that had that similar sort of theme
Yeah.
around, mid to late 40s.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how like like the idea of sacrifice is valued, but not too much though, not to the point that like your family doesn't
Mm,
have time, and like with you, and that you're ignoring them, and so it's kind of like in some ways that like even though it's maybe not say that outright, but it's like this idea that like okay, these are things that we consider good values and stuff, but not too much though. Like again, it's I feel like it's just different times. Like in some ways a mixed message, but in other ways it's like kind of like contradictory. That like and it's like where I feel like that's overall like kind of what maybe makes this a more complicated movie. That it's probably in some ways like more realistic in that sense, but in other ways, it's kind of like a harder holiday movie to digest because of the fact that, like, we just want, I mean, I hate to say it, but like we do just want, kind of the soma that we have with It's a Wonderful Life for a holiday movie and stuff,
Yeah. It is leaves you in quite a sort of awkward place, this movie, as does The Preacher's Wife, really.
Right.
But yeah.
So yeah, that's probably like a good time to segue into that, unless you have like another.
No. I actually, funnily enough, I mean, I found it was so kind of slow and late 40s, the whole Bishop's Wife movie. And Cary Grant was just so nice and sort of lovable that I got really quite bored with it. I'll be quite honest with you by the time I finished it. And The Preacher's Wife was quite a lot better, in my opinion, I thought, as a movie.
Interesting.
I don't know what your take was, but
yeah, we don't really see that too often with like kind of these. Like probably the closest thing was maybe like I'm trying to think now what movie we saw that was kind of like that. I'll have to kind of think back, during our talk and stuff like that. But in this case, here we have a. I feel like in some ways, like kind of what's similar to like Shall We Dance is that, like, here is another set piece, so to speak, that, like, where we're featuring, like, Denzel Washington and Whitney Houston and stuff. I mean, that's pretty clear. Like, it's like kind of you can't get any more clear than this one. And but once again, though, we do focus on this kind of bizarre love triangle and stuff, and it's probably a little bit more overt, I'd say, that where like different times, like a lot of the supporting characters are kind of like, "Ooh, honey," like kind of nudging each other and stuff like that. So we see less of that in the the original, where it's if we see anything, it's like kind of different times, like the women gossiping and stuff like that, and then, like, then Dudley would kind of walk over and go, "Hi, ladies, would you like to join us for lunch?" And like kind of like, again, it's like very much like this charm / innocence and stuff like that. But here, like, there's none of that in The Preacher's Wife.
No. I mean, I think it's quite a clever remake in a way, in that the same way they took. I want to say the Judy Garland movie we watched. I can't even think of the name now.
Stars Born?
Stars Born, yes.
Yeah.
In they took a a very sort of straight narrative and then made it into a musical with Judy Garland. They've kind of done something a little bit similar with The Preacher's Wife, in that it's basically the same story but interjected with a few sort of jazz numbers with Whitney Houston, and also gospel with her and various other bits and pieces to sort of pad it out. But I think it actually does help the story and makes it more interesting to watch. Definitely, it makes you realize just how good a singer Whitney Houston was. But
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's a very much, certainly you feel a lot more compelled and to see how life pans out for our for this bishop, because he's in a poor neighborhood. There's a lot of people who have real sort of problems, and he's putting himself way out in front for all of these people, helping them with all sort with if they're sick or if they're in sort of problem with the law and everything else. And you really feel like sorry for this guy, because he's really doing such a great job. So the stakes are far higher, I would say, than some rather well-heeled Englishman living in a mansion in the middle of New York. So from that perspective, it works so much better in terms
definitely
of
more relatable.
Yeah, he's a much more relatable character. And I would say I really thought Courtney Vance, I want to say, it does a fantastic job as the bishop. I tell you, I thought all the scenes between him and Denzel were really good. They were both played off each other really well.
And when he spoke, you swear he was a preacher, that he was, that he did that in real life, that it wasn't just acting and stuff like that.
Yeah. And this feels much more sort of timely in that, this is mid-90s. There's a lot of gang violence that was affecting a lot of black people at the time. A lot of urban violence. So, you can tell. I mean, it starts off with people shooting each other in the streets pretty early on in this movie. And so someone who tries to put themselves put themselves in the way of that and really help out people. You really have to sort of identify with that character and sort of think he's pretty brave and selfless to do things like that. And there's it starts off with them shutting down the youth center, so he's trying his best to sort of combat this in his community. So it was definitely a completely different scenario from this guy with his English maid. And that was the one thing I couldn't understand in the original. Right, first of all, it's pretty inconceivable that you've got like some English guy as a bishop living in the middle of New York in a mansion, and someone's willing to bankroll him for that. But it's David Niven, so that was he had a fairly charmed life anyway, so that's sort of believable. But then he has this maid who's there sort of, all right, governor, would you like a cup of tea? Like, how did she find her way into the middle of New York?
Right.
I mean, it was just,
it must have came with a package.
It was weird. It was a package deal, 2 for 1. So that was a bit strange. But of course, this guy has his mother-in-law, and that's about it. So very different sort of circumstance. But
it's interesting how some of the changes that they made, though, like like they made the daughter to a son, and then like then there was also like kind of this subplot of the son like kind of having his friend Hakeem and stuff, and there's so much drama around the fact that like he misses his kind of friend and stuff like that. And then major spoiler, like ultimately they end up together as like kind of brothers and stuff like that. I thought it was sweet, like kind of showing like kind of relationship stuff, but I almost feel like in some ways that like it was like, other than like kind of that, like kind of creating this kind of like feeling like, oh, like kind of he really has this friend that he misses and stuff, but I really didn't see like the point of it for the overall plot and stuff like that. Like I don't know, like I'm trying to think of what else it even did.
I mean, I think it's just then as a sort of a tool to show just how sort of selfless this family is, and that they've taken this kid.
I see.
Who hasn't got any sort of parents, and
yeah.
also to heighten the sort of emotional heartstring tug of the little boy who's grown attached to this kid, and we don't know if he's going off to some foster parents, so you just think, oh, that's going to be fairly sort of terrible, generally speaking. So that I think that was how it was done there, really, just to sort of again raise the emotional stakes for the characters. And I think they chose a son just to sort of, because obviously mothers' sons tend to be a little bit closer, I would say, in general. So I think it was again to sort of make you a bit more connected with the Whitney's character, basically.
Yeah, and that's like Whitney, like kind of character Julia is an interesting kind of where she definitely is less of the kind of passive, like tagging along kind of wife and stuff like that. Like different times, like they're having like all out brawls, like it's pretty much like like whereas in the bishop's wife, the Julia in that one is like kind of more like oh, whatever he says is like kind of right. We're into the 90s now, so this is like after the women's lib, and so she's like kind of basically gonna not take any stuff from the Henry and stuff, and other times like she's like kind of just like ready to kind of walk out and stuff, like.
Yeah, I mean, there's that whole scene where she's going, "Give me the keys to the car," because she's so annoyed at him, and she just wants to sort of drive off. Yeah, I mean, the other difference with this one, which I can't remember actually because I got kind of bored by the original, but the church was actually run by her father in The Preacher's Wife, which was a difference from the bishop's wife. There was no connection like that, was there? No. So that sort of that gives her quite a bit more sort of depth as a character in this, I would say, in that she's almost as invested in the community as he is, because she has this kind of parental link to the church, and her father was the one that ran it. So him taking the choice to sort of try and replace it or get it rebuilt is a great affront to her. As she has this sort of connection to the church.
Yeah, there was definitely that kind of question that came up in this one, where it's like how could you do that without like kind of talking to me and stuff like that, and we definitely see lot more reason why she has that agency, like you said, because of the fact that, like, you know, he kind of more or less inherited the church because of, you know, that kind of married, I guess, so to speak, into the family business and stuff.
Yeah, and I think as well the other major difference is having the mother-in-law living with them, and she has to sort of battle with this sort of thing of the mother-in-law sort of criticizing their relationship or criticizing their circumstance, but at the same time, you know, she was also quite supportive of the bishop as well in different ways. In fact, it's almost like she's more against her daughter than she is the bishop in some ways.
And I feel like the other thing that she does, or what she serves as purpose, is like that she's different times saying like, oh, you know, oh, we never did things that way in my day and stuff like that. So if I feel like that she's speaking to like, oh, like, you know, we should do these, you know, you should do this because this is the way we've always done it and stuff. And Whitney's like, no, actually, we don't have to do that anymore. You know, like kind of, I feel like that's like kind of the major conflict that to bring out the highlighting that, like, you know, just because we've always done this way. And I think that's an interesting point though about with Hollywood movies sometimes, is that like there's just kind of this trope of like, oh, it's tradition and like, you know, getting the goose or like kind of getting everybody together and stuff like that. And then, you know, like, so here we're having Whitney Houston be this voice of like, well, just because it's always been done this way doesn't mean it's the best way and stuff.
Yeah. And you feel actually she's quite isolated as a character because the bishop is just doing everything for the community and doing what, you know, that's obviously his main priority. So that drives all of his actions. The mother-in-law seems to support him, but also sort of, you know, is trying to sort of figure out some way or basically push her ideas of how they should be living onto, you know, Whitney's character. And she's kind of like left on her own to try and find her own way of getting her interests and met and dealt with there. So, yeah.
I think it's no accident that dynamic is created because here, like, is a movie that's directed by a woman, right? Penny Marshall.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, you know, like definitely it's just, it's subtle, but it's like an insight into the fact that, like, you know, a lot of times we see things from the male protagonist's view and stuff because of the fact that, like, you know, it's male directors and, you know, that kind of thing and stuff like that. And then it's, you know, I feel like different times if we don't have like, you know, a woman in the director's chair, it's like, you know, that is all lost and stuff, you know, like kind of that insight of like, you know, what the pressures are on the wife and stuff like, because, you know, like, that's the thing that we also, it's interesting, we don't really highlight stuff, but in the original movie, it's, you know, the bishop's wife, and this one is the preacher's wife, you know, and so we kind of, even though like we the story is a lot driven by, you know, kind of the Henry figure and stuff, but we kind of forget that, you know, the title isn't, you know, about the bishop, you know, it's about, you know, about the wife and stuff.
Yeah. And I would say in a funny sort of way though, the same is kind of true in this one, in that a lot of the dynamics and the challenges are all face the wife, but in terms of screen time, we probably spend more of it with Denzel and Courtney Vance most of the time. Yeah. When we're actually sort of watching the movie.
Because that's more kind of related to even what the original was and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But you're right. I mean, a lot of the main sort of driving force of the avenues the story takes, all driven by the wife's character. But it's just funny that she doesn't actually get as many lines or as screen time. No, even though there was a female director. But yeah.
But you know, they you know, definitely highlight her singing though. Like that's one thing that they don't miss out on. And in fact, I feel like that's what tags on the extra half hour is just, you know, these big, you know, set pieces where, you know, she's, you know, singing. And in fact, like, you know, they nearly won Oscars for like kind of, you know, the music and stuff. So that's you know, no doubt, you know, like kind of what they were driving at.
Well, I mean, there's Lionel Richie as well.
Oh, yes.
But of course, I don't think Lionel Richie does actually any singing in No, he just does a bit of piano playing. And of course, Gregory Hines, famous tap dancer,
but no
doesn't
dancing.
do any tap dancing. Yeah, I know, right? It's quite interesting in that respect. But, yeah, definitely, you do get your money's worth with Whitney, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other major difference I would say between this and the original is you actually get to see the church a lot more in this, and you get to see the kind of the types of the service, and as a way of kind of getting crowbarring Whitney's gospel singing into the movie. But it's still really interesting to see the dynamics, because you have like the nativity play that's kind of going wrong, and the you're just the dynamics of that kind of service is quite sort of fun to watch as well.
Yeah, it definitely creates some of the humor and stuff too, like where the boiler is kind of falling apart, and so it's getting louder and louder, and so but also getting faster, and meanwhile like kind of that's inciting the choir to sing faster and stuff. So that was definitely one of the most memorable parts of the movie.
Yeah, I would say in general the script is really good in this. In that there's a lot of funny dialogue, funny situational comedy of stuff where we get to really see sort of Denzel doing his more sort of comedic act, so to speak, in this, and he does it really well. Actually, he's very much sort of steals most of the scenes that he's in, although plays nicely, really well with Courtney Barnes. But, it's kind of like, between those two, you kind of, I mean, obviously Whitney's great at singing and all of those scenes, but in terms of acting, you kind of feel like she's kind of just about hanging in there by her fingernails, because the other two are doing such a great job. There was like a couple of scenes where I was like, yeah, this reminded me a little bit of J-Lo in Shall We Dance. It's kind of, but overall,
what did you think of the unintended or unwitting seduction though with Dudley and Julia and stuff?
As you were talking about earlier, the childlike innocence is much more heightened in this, and there's that's one of the interesting things about this, in that in the original, this idea that this angel or spiritual being has come down as being sort of now a corporal being, and can enjoy all the sort of
earthly delights,
physical reality, or earthly delights. There we go. But it's very much focused on romantic love. Dudley is much more sort of in The Preacher's Wife is much more innocent, in that he goes and he's there like shoving a pizza and Coke down. He's there going, "Oh man, this is amazing!" And there's lots of scenes like that where he's just he's just taking in everything and really enjoying it to the max. So it reminded me a little bit of like Big. But the Tom Hanks movie where someone gets to experience everything, but you get to see an adult basically acting like a kid and their reaction. So it's really sort of reminiscent of that. But yeah, he does a great job in all of those scenes, and this sort of innocent appreciation of sort of just going out to people and say, "Hey, you look great today," and all this kind of stuff, and people just being sort of bowled over by all that. So I thought that was really well managed in his performance. And so when he does come across Julia, it's a really kind of gradual kind of relationship they build up that starts with a more sort of innocent sort of just having fun together, and because it feels much more natural than the Bishop's Wife, the original, which feels much more contrived. You kind of feel like Cary Grant has just come down, he's going to go and sleep with Julia and that's it. Whereas in this one, it feels much more natural in its progression.
And I feel like it's more through like the mother-in-law that the observations, stuff like that like she's like seeing it, and it's almost like we're like Julia's like even denying it, like there's nothing going on and stuff like that, even though like maybe like part of her is starting to feel more and more like she's falling for this angel and stuff like that, and even like like at one point she like kind of says it to Dudley and stuff like that, like, "Hey, I see what's going on," and stuff like that. And again, we have this innocence and stuff on the one hand, but the other, like it's kind of, he's forced to like kind of step back and go, "Oh man, maybe she's right," and stuff.
Yeah, you kind of get the impression that Cary Grant doesn't quite have that same reservation or self-reflection. Like towards the end of the movie, you're seeing lots of scenes with Denzel as Dudley, who's kind of like going, "This is not good what I'm doing here," and looking very pensive and reflective, and just like, "Oh, I better I better cool it, And so, yeah, I mean, they managed that whole thing really, really well, I thought.
Mm. And then, once again, we have this idea though that like, everything's kind of forgotten and stuff. But I feel like in this one, in the remake, it's more made on that he's forgotten, like Dudley's influence and stuff like that. But they do remember everything else around, like kind of how it happened and stuff like that. So it's kind of goes back to what was said in the original, that that an angel plants these ideas into a mortal's head and stuff like that. That then they take credit for it, and I think that's like an interesting point though, that like different times. Like angels are there to inspire us and to kind of, give us ideas and stuff, like, and they were, I think, really kind of hammering that in the original because of, like even like the character professor and stuff. And that's an interesting character that's kind of like taken out of the remake.
It's true,
and stuff.
Actually. Yeah. I mean, I guess you can say sort of cynically that the professor is there to sort of temper, your hardline atheist intellectual who's watching it. In this one, they make no kind of. They're just like, if you're watching this, then we have no room. We're not going to try and accommodate any atheists in this movie. You better be a good church-going person to watch this movie. That's the audience we're going for. Forget everyone else. So yeah, you're definitely right. They did forget completely about that. I mean, one thing though, in terms of the way Dudley's dealt with in this one is was for me kind of interesting in terms of a Christian perspective, because. In this one, they actually expand on his character a little bit, and they say that, I was cut down in my prime. And, and I've been up in heaven for a while. Yeah. And now I'm kind of back. And there's also this kind of bit that's alluded to later on, that his mother, he had some sort of brother that died in childbirth or died at a very young age or something. And it's, they very subtly mention it, but it's done in such a way that that's very clear of what he's trying to say. But I mean, for me, the overriding thing that got me about this is that this is almost like he's been reincarnated, which is not very sort of Christian thing. No, but it does, because he's very specific about, unlike an angel who should be just sort of a general kind of faceless spiritual being of good. In this one, he has a personal history and he has been alive and then so that was kind of interesting. I mean, short of him actually being properly mortal, he's almost, a reincarnation, which is a little bit that's a bit kind of controversial for such a Christian movie, I thought, but yeah, because it's only Jesus who's allowed to reincarnate. He's the only one.
Yeah, I mean, different times. I feel like this is we have like kind of even like in these horror movies and stuff like that like there's this kind of canon, things that are canon, stuff like that like and then there's this kind of Hollywood canon and stuff, like going back to like with zombies, right, where initially like kind of like they're made because of like their infection and therefore they come back and they're slow walking stuff, but then like we changed it to like but actually now we have fast versus slow zombies, and then but you already have this disease and like it's just coming back to life that creates it. So it's like kind of where that similarly with religion, that like we have things that like kind of more or less the gospel, so to speak, is like that, but then meanwhile like we get like mixed Hollywood kind of interpretations of what is like kind of how angel mechanics work and stuff.
Exactly. And like any good Hollywood movie, this one has rules in it that have to be obeyed.
Yes.
In that he very clearly delineates them when he first meets the preacher and says, okay, so number one, everything has to be by your own free will. I can't actually do it for you. And I can't remember what it was, something like you would have had to have done it anyway. They don't really stick hard and fast to the rules in this one. It's not like Back to the Future or something where they have specific sort of time related rules. But the main one, of course, is that you're going to forget it at the end. But
and he has his book, right? Like that's something that was an interesting addition, that he actually whips it out and stuff. And
that's used to great comedic effect, actually, with the whole Windows 95 scene, which I thought was really funny.
I wonder if that was a product plug there.
I'm sure. Well, yeah, I mean, that's back in the fairly early days, I guess, of Microsoft. They probably could have used a bit of product placement. There's quite a bit, I think, in The Preacher's Wife, from what I remember. There was lots of him eating things, and, you know, it's perfect, really, for products like this. Angel is coming down and innocently taking advantage of all these earthly delights. It's like, why not, you know, have a Coke and a pizza at the same time?
Right.
So, yeah. So the other difference, I think, with this one, which was kind of interesting, and it was the one scene I found it like oddly touching. No pun intending. Is when, you know, there's this whole sort of repeated theme of him shaking hands or touching someone's hand, and their behavior completely being changed through this sort of channeling of them being in the presence of God, basically. And that first scene with when he does that with the preacher is really sort of it's just incredibly well acted, I think, for such a subtle scene, because he's so cynical and thinks this guy is a complete sort of maniac, and then his whole kind of attitude towards him changes from that sort of one handshake. That was a really you've got to sort of say, first of all, hats off to Courtney Vance for that scene, and also to Penny Marshall for directing it so well. I mean, I was really actually very impressed with the directing all the way through this, because I really felt all the characters really made the most of their lines, and they were acting with each other in each scene very much. So because
different times, like when you're talking about something like angels and stuff, it's really easy to become cynical and kind of, you know, like you're like, oh, this is kind of, you know, just it's holiday, but it's kind of silly in some ways and stuff. But if it's kind of, you know, done well, like you said, with direction and kind of the acting and stuff like that, you start buying into it. You start really kind of like suspending your belief, and then, like, you know, kind of like you're more than long for the ride, but then you're kind of engaged and stuff like that. I think, though, like, what's funny also, though, is that, like, we still have different tropes, though. One of which is, like, kind of seems to be a common theme, like, you know, like, you got to have the evil real estate magnate. Of course, you know, once again, you know, like, kind of, it's, you know, change the name from, you know, like, kind of Potter and stuff, but then, you know, it's funny that, you know, Gregory Hines is like the one that's kind of playing it, but then, you know, at the same time, though, it's funny that instead of him being like kind of a pure caricature, he does have a moment of redemption, and it's actually, you know, like, we see it actually in the moment with, like, kind of, you know, Courtney Vance giving this kind of heartfelt, you know, sermon stuff. So it's really more believable than, like, kind of, you know, this person who, like, you know, is just a heart of evil and stuff.
Well, I mean, this is like one of these things, you know, what is the true message of Christmas from Hollywood movies? The message is clearly that real estate is evil, you know, just like, you know, that is the true enemy of Christmas, is real estate and real estate development.
Oh, man.
Because it does seem like virtually every Christmas movie, there's someone who's you know, some sort of developer who's the bad guy. But and you kind of wonder, surely there's easier ways to destroy a community than completely knocking it all down and rebuilding it. But yeah, I mean, I guess it gets into this. I mean, you know, it gets into the themes of gentrification, which wasn't so much. You know, you almost had the opposite in the 40s, because you know, the government was trying to get you know, get people to move to the suburbs, be homeowners in order to establish things and get things moving in the economy. Whereas you got completely the opposite come the 90s, where they wanted to sort of, you know, basically make more money out of rental and commercial property in areas that were otherwise sort of unviable for that. So yeah, it touches on that. Also, because of course touches on, you know, racial issue of people being accused of crimes they didn't commit, or being misidentified as, you know, which happens to Billy, the character. Is fairly sort of full on, in that, you know, the shopkeeper comes out, it's the nearest black guy near the gun is the one who's accused. And so
you kind of really can see how that kind of thing happens, like, you know, and it's funny how it definitely does echo, like, on a lot of things that, you know, is still very current and stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that was really interesting, the way they dealt with the court case and how he could go and make a difference, because it's almost, he has to, whereas he's very kind of resigned to the whole judicial process and doesn't really speak up with the first hearing. The second one, he sort of strides in and he's preaching to the jury, and that's how ultimately he finds his voice as a preacher, which sort of gets Billy off, which was sort of an interesting sort of character development.
It definitely is like kind of you know, just a way that they highlight, you know, how, like you said, involved he is with the community, that like you know, we don't see any of that in, you know, like kind of the bishop's wife and stuff. You know, like kind of he's like kind of, you know, not only removed himself from the old church and stuff like that, but he's like basically, you know, just going to like these luncheons and, you know, kind of just, you know, really like there's, you know, like almost like a disconnect between him and what's called the community. Whereas, you know, this one, you know, Courtney Vance's character is very much like, you know, almost too involved and stuff.
Yeah, and in the original, you just get the feeling that he's going to fundraisers all the time, and it's actually, he's probably not only leaving his sort of family duties by the wayside, but also his sort of community ones as well.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, it's a much more, it's a much harder kind of challenge that he has to bear, and that his community needs so much more help that he can't help but sort of pull himself away from his family. So it's a much more complicated struggle for this character, I think.
Definitely.
So I was trying to think if there was I mean, overall the comedy was really good in it. I thought that the dialogue was really good. It was well directed. You know, I thought it was a lot better than the original, which is not something I can say very often.
No, especially with these, you know, remakes versus the originals. I mean, that's just something. It's we I don't think we've said maybe one out of maybe at least a dozen or 20 times and stuff. Yeah,
I know, right? Because we've been of course we mentioned this last time. We've been doing this over a year now. Yeah. And there's very few, I would say, if you look back at, I mean, we're doing this almost once a week. So we've done almost probably a good 60 odd episodes. And I think the ones where we actually like the remake they can only be about 2 or 3 out of 60. So the other thing that made me laugh, and this is sort of testament to the good direction, because it just really reminded me of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I don't know if this is where Larry David got the idea, but there's this bit where we're talking about Billy and he's trying to, you know, get him off of this charge. And the preacher sort of says to Billy, so, you know, can you tell me the truth? And there's this bit where Billy's looking at him, he's looking back, and it lasts for ages where the preacher's just kind of like doing this, going backwards and forwards, trying to determine if Billy's telling the truth. And I just thought, that's just completely Curb Your Enthusiasm. Did Larry David just nick that idea from the preacher's wife? I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you know, like definitely, you know, somebody like Larry David is very much, you know, student comedy. So he's like looking to, you know, anywhere he can grab something like that, you know. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's probably like one of those kind of moments that is such a gem and stuff like that. That I can see that. Like he probably would have no qualms about like kind of, you know, ripping something like that off and stuff.
Yeah, and I really thought it was good the way that you know, Penny Marshall gave Denzel lots of opportunities to be funny in it. I mean, when they go to the jazz club and they're dancing, and you just think, he's gonna kind of like sweep Whitney off her feet. He's gonna be all smooth and charismatic, and he just does just, you know, some really funny dancing. And I just thought it was great that they managed to kind of throw that in. That kind of subverted my expectations quite a lot there.
It's really brilliant when you think about it, because, you know, Denzel is kind of known as this kind of, you know, he's, you know, casting him as like shorthand for, you know, a suave, dashing character stuff. So having him like do something really awkward and kind of, you know, like ridiculous and stuff is like, you know, it's comic gold. I mean, it's something that like you just totally like, it caught me off guard by far. So yeah, and
it just makes you like him that much more as a character as well. The other thing I'd say, which I really liked about this, was that often you see him as the kind of man alone in an action movie. He doesn't, and he has a few nice kind of dialogues, a few nice one-liners, but it's very rare to see him actually kind of make strides at you know, with lots of comic timing, and you realize just how good he is at that actually. And it's a shame there aren't more movies where they've given him more sort of room for that. But yeah, no, I enjoyed it greatly. I thought it was a really good movie.
I did just kind of want to mention one other thing was like, one thing they did keep also was the skating scene, right? That it was interesting that sometimes, like kind of with some of these remakes and stuff, that it's almost just, again, like a cut and paste and everything like that. But I thought it was interesting, again, that like in this case, he was like kind of, charming, but it wasn't like didn't feel as a rehearsed kind of performance that the original felt and stuff. Like this one did feel like a little bit more like, I can kind of see that, like kind of that, what's it called? We're looking to take the son to, skating and stuff like that. And then, then Julia and, Dudley have this moment and stuff like that. Whereas, the original, right, it's like, like, oh, hey, let's head over there and go skating and stuff. It's a little bit more like kind of like forced, I guess, or like kind of, and then there was like a opportunity to kind of show Cary Grant doing these fantastic, kind of ballet ice moves and stuff.
Yeah. No, it did feel a lot more contrived. I think that's one of the great things about The Preacher's Wife, is that everything plays out in such a natural feeling way. And it's very rare that you feel like things are occurring so naturally in a movie.
Definitely.
So
yeah. So this was, of course, the start of our holiday season for the originals versus remakes. So coming up, we're going to be looking at the How the Grinch Stole Christmas and Miracle on 34th Street, a couple other holiday classics. So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.